Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly past the edge of the living world and follow you, yes you, down into a place most people spend their entire lives trying not to think about. It's cool down here, not freezing, just that oddly consistent underground chill, like stepping into a cave that somehow never changes its mind. You walk beside a god who looks less like a terrifying ruler and more like someone who hasn't had a proper vacation in, well, ever. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a full shift here. No sunlight, no coffee breaks, and definitely no out-of-office email replies. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all drifting off together, even if you're nowhere near an ancient Greek underworld. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow Hades as he walks, not strides, not glides, just walks, along a familiar path carved into the stone of his own domain. It's not dramatic like the stories make it sound. No constant screaming, no lava pits at every turn. Most of it is quiet, vast, echoing quiet, the kind that presses gently against your ears until you almost forget what silence feels like. This is the Greek underworld, not hell in the fiery sense, but a layered realm described in ancient myths, divided into places like the Asphodel Meadows, where ordinary souls drift in a sort of neutral haze, and the Elysian Fields, reserved for heroes and the especially virtuous. That part is well known. What people don't always realize is that Hades isn't some villain lurking in shadows. In many myths, he's more like a strict but fair administrator. If Olympus is a chaotic corporate office full of drama, then the underworld is the department that actually keeps the paperwork moving. And tonight, you can tell he's tired. Not dramatically tired, no sighing into the void or collapsing onto a throne, but the subtle kind. The way he pauses just a little longer than usual when passing the river Styx. The way his gaze lingers on nothing in particular. If gods had eye bags, his would probably have their own mythology by now. Historically, or mythologically if we're being precise, Hades drew the underworld as his domain after the Titanomachy, the great war between the Olympian gods and the Titans. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades, everything below. A fair division, technically, but you can't help thinking he got the quietest and maybe loneliest assignment. You step carefully as the ground subtly shifts under your feet, more like packed ash than soil. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the soft murmur of souls, not crying, just existing. It's oddly peaceful, like a waiting room that stretches forever. Hades stops. He doesn't announce it. He just stops walking. You nearly bump into him, which would be awkward, because bumping into the god of the dead feels like something you'd regret for eternity, or at least write a very apologetic scroll about. He looks ahead, then slightly upward, as if he can see through layers of earth and stone into the world above. And maybe he can. The myths aren't entirely clear on that. Historians are still debating whether ancient Greeks imagined their gods as constantly aware of all realms, or if even they experience moments of uncertainty and distance. Quiet, you think he's saying. Not out loud, but in that way you somehow understand anyway. And that's when you realize it's always quiet here. Too quiet. You know that feeling when your phone battery dies and suddenly the world feels disconnected? Multiply that by eternity. No notifications, no sunlight, not even the occasional someone liked your post. Just an endless stream of souls arriving, being sorted, and settling into their afterlives. There's a strange fact that doesn't get talked about much. The underworld wasn't meant to be a place of punishment for most people. Unlike later ideas of hell, Greek myths describe it as more of a final destination for everyone, regardless of how exciting or boring their life had been. Which means Hades has been overseeing not just heroes and villains, but millions of very average people having very average afterlives. Imagine managing that. No wonder he looks like he needs a break. He turns slightly, glancing in your direction. Not surprised you're there, just acknowledging it like you've always been part of the background. You get the sense that to him, everything eventually becomes background, and then unexpectedly, he exhales. It's not dramatic. If you weren't paying attention, you might miss it, But in a place where almost nothing changes, even a small breath feels like a shift in the universe. I think the feeling of his voice reaches you again. I will step away. You blink. Step away? From the underworld? That's like a lighthouse deciding it's done with the ocean, or a barista abandoning the espresso machine during the morning rush. It's not supposed to happen. Yet here he is, already turning, already beginning to walk, not deeper into the darkness, but toward a narrow, winding path that slopes upward. A path you hadn't noticed before. Or maybe it only appears when he decides it does. You follow, of course. Because what else are you going to do? Stay behind and explain to a three-headed dog why his boss just ghosted the entire afterlife. Speaking of which, as you pass a massive stone archway, you catch a glimpse of Cerberus, the infamous three-headed guardian of the underworld gates. In myth, Cerberus prevents the dead from leaving and the living from entering. Right now, though, one head is watching you, one is watching Hades, and the third seems to be distracted by its own tail. Honestly, even mythical creatures have off days. Cerberus lets out a low, confused rumble as Hades walks past without so much as a nod of instruction. That's unusual. Normally there are rules, procedures, a whole system. But tonight, the system is taking a break. You half expect lightning to strike, or for Zeus to appear immediately with a clipboard and a very strong opinion. But nothing happens. No alarms, no divine notifications, just the quiet continuation of everything. For now, you climb. The air shifts gradually, not warmer but lighter, less dense. You didn't even realize how heavy the underworld felt until it starts to lift off your shoulders. It's like stepping out of a room you didn't know was stuffy. Behind you, the underworld continues, humming softly with the presence of countless souls. Ahead, there's something else, something brighter, not blinding yet, just different. And beside you, the god of the dead walks with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who has finally decided to take a single day off after several thousand years of overtime. You almost want to tell him to enjoy it, but somehow you think he already knows. And far below, unnoticed for now, the underworld begins its first moment without him. Section 2. You keep walking beside him, and the strange part isn't that he's leaving, it's how normal it feels. No thunder cracking the ceiling of the world, no divine announcement echoing through the caverns, just footsteps, steady and unhurried, as if this has always been an option, and no one ever thought to take it. Behind you, the underworld continues its quiet rhythm. Souls arrive, rivers flow, judges sit where they always have. On paper, if the ancient Greeks had paperwork for the afterlife, everything should still function. And in a way it does. But something subtle begins to shift. You don't notice it immediately. It's more like when a room's temperature changes by a single degree, barely perceptible at first but slowly, undeniably different. Far below in the asphodel meadows, the endless field of softly wandering souls, people begin to hesitate. Not panic, nothing that dramatic, but pause, as if they've forgotten what they were doing, even though what they were doing was mostly just existing. There's a well-known detail in Greek myth. Most souls didn't retain strong memories after death. They drifted, half aware, neither suffering nor celebrating. But here's a lesser-known twist. Some ancient sources suggest that memory in the underworld wasn't entirely gone, just dulled, like a dream fading after you wake up. And tonight, that dream feels even thinner. A man, if he still thinks of himself as one, stops mid-step. He looks around, though there's nothing new to see. Historians are still debating whether the Greeks imagined these souls as conscious individuals or more like shadows of their former selves. Either way, something is off. He turns slightly, as if expecting direction. There isn't any. Back at the edge of the realm, near the rivers that divide the underworld's regions, the judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, sit in their usual places. Their job is to decide where each soul belongs. It's a big responsibility, but they've been doing it for, well, forever. Tonight, Minos tilts his head. A new soul stands before him, waiting. Normally, the process is smooth. A glance, a sense, a decision. Elysium, Asphodel, or somewhere less pleasant like Tartarus. But now there's a flicker, just a moment, where the certainty isn't there. It's like trying to click a button and nothing happens. He frowns, which is saying something because eternal judges aren't exactly known for their expressive faces. You might expect chaos right away, souls running in circles, dramatic music swelling, but no, it's much quieter than that. The line simply slows. If this were a modern office, it would feel like the system has gone down and no one wants to admit it yet. Everyone just keeps refreshing the page, hoping it fixes itself. And somewhere nearby, the river Styx flows as it always has, dark and steady. Charon, the ferryman, continues his work, guiding souls across in exchange for the traditional coin. That part is famously consistent. Greek burial customs often included placing a coin in the mouth or on the eyes of the deceased to pay him. Here's something less talked about. If you didn't have the coin, you weren't ferried across immediately. Some myths say you had to wander the shores for 100 years. Imagine missing a payment and getting a century-long delay. Suddenly, late fees don't seem so bad. Charon doesn't notice anything at first. He rows, he collects, he repeats. But after a while, he glances up. The usual presence, the quiet, steady authority that seems to anchor everything, isn't there. He doesn't panic. He's too old, too used to the strange to panic. But one of his skeletal fingers taps the edge of the boat just once, a small, thoughtful gesture. Back on the upward path, you feel none of this directly, but there's a faint sensation, like pressure changing before a storm. Not dangerous, just unsettled. You glance at Hades. He hasn't looked back, which is interesting because in many myths, gods are deeply aware of their domains. Yet here he is, continuing upward without hesitation. Historians are still debating whether this suggests a rare act of trust or simply that even a god can choose, just once, not to check their notifications. You almost imagine him muting the underworld like a group chat that never stops buzzing. Probably long overdue. The path grows narrower, winding between rough stone walls that seem to close in and then open again, as if the earth itself is breathing. You run your hand along the surface. It's cool, slightly damp, textured with centuries, maybe millennia of passage. It's strange to think that very few living beings have taken this route. In myth, only a handful of heroes, like Orpheus or Heracles, ever entered and returned from the underworld. And even they didn't exactly come out relaxed, more like emotionally complicated. You, on the other hand, are just walking. Casual stroll with the god of the dead. No big deal. If your friends could see you now, they'd probably have a lot of questions. Or they'd just assume you finally took that digital detox way too seriously. A faint glow appears ahead. Not bright sunlight yet, just a suggestion of it. A soft, distant brightness that feels almost unfamiliar after so much darkness. You notice Hades slow slightly, not out of fear, but something closer to curiosity. That's the part that catches you. Curiosity. For a god who has seen every soul that has ever lived, kings, farmers, poets, people who definitely thought they were more important than they actually were, there's still something new in this moment. Or maybe it's not new. Maybe it's something he hasn't allowed himself to notice in a very long time. Behind you, the underworld continues its subtle unraveling. Not collapse, nothing so dramatic, but a loosening. Decisions take longer, movements feel less certain. Cerberus, back at the gates, has now sat down entirely, all three heads watching three different directions as if waiting for instructions that aren't coming. One head yawns. Another scratches behind its ear with a surprisingly delicate motion. The third just stares into the distance, deeply philosophical for a creature whose main job is don't let anyone through. You almost feel bad for it. Almost. Because up ahead, the air shifts again, this time unmistakably different. Warmer, lighter. There's a faint scent you can't quite place. Not flowers exactly, but something alive. Something growing. You didn't realize how absent that smell was below. Hades steps forward, and for a moment, just a moment, you think he hesitates. Then he continues. Of course he does. If you've spent eternity in one place, even a small change probably feels like stepping into another universe. Which, in a way, it is. You follow, feeling that strange mix of calm and anticipation. Like the moment before you open a door you've never opened before, even though it's always been there. And somewhere far beneath your feet, the underworld keeps going. Just not quite the same. Section 3. You don't see the moment it happens. You feel it. A subtle pause in the air behind you, like a thread stretching just a little too far before it snaps back into place. Not broken, not chaotic, just confused. And oddly enough, the source of that confusion has three heads. Back at the gates, where the underworld meets the paths that lead nowhere and everywhere at once, Cerberus is having what you might generously call a professional identity crisis. Now, Cerberus is famous in Greek mythology, the three-headed dog tasked with guarding the entrance to the underworld, making sure the dead stay in and the living stay out. That part is well established. But here's something less often mentioned. In some ancient depictions, Cerberus isn't constantly ferocious. Sometimes he's described as almost tame, at least to those who belong. And right now, with Hades gone, belong has become a very flexible concept. One head lifts, sniffing the air. Another tilts sideways, ears twitching. The third is licking a paw with intense concentration, which, honestly, feels like the most relatable response to a sudden lack of supervision. A faint sound echoes from the path beyond the gate. Not loud, not threatening, just unfamiliar. Cerberus freezes. All three heads turn in slightly different directions, then slowly align. You get the sense that this is the closest the creature comes to a team meeting. And without Hades there to reinforce the rules, the decision-making process becomes experimental. He takes one cautious step forward, then another. Now, historically speaking, Cerberus is supposed to be nearly impossible to pass. Even heroes like Heracles only managed it under very specific conditions, usually involving divine permission or a strength level that borders on ridiculous. But here's the odd detail. Cerberus isn't just a barrier. He's also a signal. His presence alone reinforces the boundary. And tonight, that signal is flickering. A faint, wandering soul, one of the countless who drift without much direction, approaches the edge of the gate. Not intentionally, more like someone absent-mindedly walking toward a door they don't remember opening. Cerberus notices. One head growls, another hesitates. The third blinks slowly, as if wondering whether this is really worth the effort. You can almost hear the internal debate. Do we stop this? Is this still the rule? Did someone update the policy while we weren't looking? It's like a security guard realizing no one ever told him what to do if the boss just leaves. The soul takes another step. Cerberus moves, quick, instinctive, but not quite as precise as usual. He blocks the path, but there's a fraction of hesitation in the motion. The kind you'd never notice if you weren't paying close attention. The soul stops. They stare at each other. It's not dramatic. No snarling, no lunging. Just a quiet standoff between a creature designed to enforce a boundary and a being that no longer fully understands boundaries. Eventually, the soul turns away, drifting back into the dim expanse of the underworld. Not because they were forced, but because something inside them still recognizes where they're supposed to be. Cerberus watches them go. All three heads lower slightly, not in defeat, just uncertainty. And then, in a moment that would probably ruin his terrifying reputation forever if anyone important were watching, one of the heads lets out a soft, confused whine. Honestly, if this were a modern workplace, this is the part where someone sends a quick question email that turns into a 40-message thread and still solves nothing. Meanwhile, deeper in the underworld, the ripple continues. The judges are still working, but slower now. A soul arrives, stands, waits. The decision comes, but it feels delayed, like a thought that almost slips away before you can grab it. Minos leans forward slightly, studying the figure before him. Rhadamanthus glances sideways, just briefly. Aeacus taps a finger against his seat, once, twice, an almost imperceptible rhythm. None of them speak. They don't need to, but something is missing. In myth, these judges were chosen for their fairness and wisdom in life. That's why they were given authority in death. Yet even wisdom, it seems, benefits from structure, from presence, from the quiet gravity of someone overseeing the whole. Historians are still debating whether the Greeks imagined Hades as actively involved in every judgment or more of a distant overseer. But in this moment, you can feel the absence like a chair pulled away from a table. Not dramatic, just noticeable. Back near the rivers, Charon has paused mid-row. That alone is unusual. The water of the Styx laps gently against the sides of his boat, a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. Souls wait on both sides, patient in the way only the dead can be. He looks toward the shore, then toward the distance. Then slowly he resumes rowing, because what else is he going to do? There's no handbook for what happens when the god of your entire realm takes a personal day. Up on the winding path, you're blissfully removed from most of this. Blissfully, but not entirely. There's a faint tug at your awareness, like a notification you can't quite read. You glance back instinctively, even though the path curves too sharply to see anything below. Hades doesn't. He continues forward, steady as ever. But you notice something subtle. His pace has changed. Not faster, not slower, just lighter, as if each step carries a little less weight than the one before. It's a strange thing to witness. A god shedding responsibility one footstep at a time. You wonder if he's aware of what's happening behind him. If he knows that Cerberus is questioning his job description, that the judges are hesitating, that the entire underworld is adjusting, ever so slightly, to his absence. Or maybe, just maybe, he knows exactly and trusts that it won't fall apart, that it can bend without breaking, that even a realm of the dead can handle a little uncertainty. You'd like to believe that. It's a comforting thought. Like thinking your house won't collapse just because you left the lights on. Ahead, the glow has grown stronger now, no longer just a hint, but a clear presence. It spills down the path in soft, golden tones, touching the stone walls and making them look almost warm. You raise a hand instinctively, as if to shield your eyes, though it's not bright enough to hurt, just unfamiliar. Hades slows again, this time more noticeably. Not hesitation, something closer to recognition. As if he's remembering what this light feels like. And for the first time since you started walking, you see something almost like a smile. Not wide, not obvious, but there. A small shift in expression that suggests this wasn't just about leaving something behind. It was about finding something again. Behind you, Cerberus settles back at the gate, still alert, still watching, but now with a lingering sense of, I hope I did that right. And honestly, same. Because as you take another step upward, leaving the underworld just a little farther behind, you can't help but feel that something important has been set in motion. Not chaos, not disaster, just change, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself but slowly reshapes everything anyway. Hammer, Section 4. You don't realize how strange direction is until no one is giving it anymore. It starts as a feeling, like walking into a place where everyone else seems to know what they're doing except you. Except here, everyone is an endless number of souls, and doing is something they barely remember how to do at all. In the Asphodel Meadows, that wide, muted expanse where most souls drift, the usual soft rhythm begins to loosen. Normally, it's almost peaceful. Figures wandering, occasionally pausing, occasionally glancing at something only they half recall. It's not joy, but it's not suffering either, just neutral existence. But now, something is off. You can imagine it like a train station where the announcements have stopped. The trains are still there. The tracks haven't moved. But no one knows which platform to stand on anymore. A woman, again, if she still remembers being one, takes a step forward and then stops. She looks down at her hands, turning them slowly as if expecting them to tell her something. They don't. Nearby, another soul begins to walk in a straight line, then abruptly changes direction, then stops entirely. Not panic, just uncertainty, the kind that creeps in when the invisible structure holding everything together starts to fade. Here's a lesser-known detail. Some ancient Greek traditions believe souls drank from the river Lethe to forget their lives before moving on. Not all myths agree on when or how this happened, but the idea of forgetfulness is central. And tonight, it's as if that forgetfulness is deepening, or maybe becoming uneven. Some souls seem almost too empty. Others flicker with fragments of memory. A man suddenly looks up, eyes widening slightly. For a moment, just a moment, you'd swear he remembers something. A face, a place, a feeling. Then it's gone. Historians are still debating whether these depictions reflect actual religious belief or poetic storytelling about memory and identity. But standing here, or rather imagining yourself here, it feels less like theory and more like watching a system lose calibration. Back at the judge's platform, the delay has grown more noticeable. A new arrival stands before them. Minos studies the soul longer than usual. Rhadamanthus leans forward. Iacchus shifts in his seat. There's a pause. Just a few seconds, but in a place where decisions are usually instant, it feels like an eternity. Finally, Minos gestures. The soul moves on, but the moment lingers. If this were a modern situation, you'd say the Wi-Fi is still connected, but everything is loading, very slowly. And no one wants to restart the router because, frankly, no one knows where the router is. Near the banks of the river Styx, Charon has developed a new habit, pausing between crossings. Not long. Just enough to look around as if expecting someone to give him the next instruction. Of course, no one does. So he shrugs, internally, because he's not exactly expressive, and keeps rowing. The boat creaks softly as it moves through the dark water, carrying souls who don't question the delay because they no longer remember what on time feels like. Somewhere deeper, near the edges of Tartarus, the region reserved for the truly punished, things remain mostly unchanged. Eternal punishments, it turns out, are very good at running themselves. If you've been pushing a boulder uphill for centuries, one quiet administrative absence isn't going to interrupt your schedule, which, oddly enough, makes Tartarus one of the most stable places in the entire underworld right now. There's a joke in there somewhere about how systems built on suffering tend to be very efficient, but you decide not to unpack that too much before bed. Meanwhile, Cerberus has settled into a new pattern. All three heads are alert, but not entirely synchronized. One watches the gate, one watches the path leading inward. The third occasionally looks up, as if hoping Hades will reappear at any moment and say, "Just kidding, I was here the whole time." He doesn't. And Cerberus, for perhaps the first time in his long existence, has to rely entirely on instinct, which is fine, mostly, because instinct, while reliable, isn't always precise. It's the difference between following a recipe and just guessing how much salt feels right. Sometimes it works, sometimes you end up with something very questionable. So far, the underworld is leaning toward slightly underseasoned confusion rather than full disaster. Back on the path, you feel the distance growing, not just physically, but something else, a loosening of connection. The deeper you go upward, the less the underworld presses against your senses. The air is different now, warmer, yes, but also carrying subtle sounds. At first, it's just a faint whisper. Then gradually you realize its movement, leaves rustling, wind shifting, the distant, almost forgotten rhythm of a world that changes from moment to moment. You didn't notice how static the underworld was until now. Hades pauses again. This time he tilts his head slightly, as if listening. To what? You follow his gaze upward. The glow has become light, soft, golden, filtered through something you can't quite see yet. It spills down the path, brushing against your face like a memory you didn't realize you missed. And here's the interesting part. In many myths, Hades rarely leaves his realm. Unlike Zeus or Poseidon, who interact frequently with the world above, Hades is more contained. His power is immense, but localized. So this quiet ascent isn't just unusual, it's almost unprecedented. Historians are still debating whether ancient Greeks imagined Hades ever truly abandoning his post, or if such moments were purely symbolic. But standing here with him, it feels real in a way that doesn't need academic agreement. He takes another step, then another. The light grows stronger. You notice something small but striking. His posture has changed. Not dramatically, but enough. His shoulders seem less burdened, his movements less deliberate. It's like watching someone take off a heavy backpack they didn't realize they'd been carrying for years. You almost want to point it out, but you don't. Because there's something quiet and respectful about letting someone discover their own lightness. Behind you, far below, the underworld continues its slow drift into uncertainty. Not collapsing, not breaking, just adjusting to a world without constant oversight. Souls wander, judges hesitate, Cerberus watches and wonders. And here on this narrow path between realms, you walk beside a god who has chosen, just for a little while, to be something other than what he has always been. Ahead, the path curves one final time. The light spills fully into view, and for the first time, you see the edge of the surface world. It's not dramatic, no grand gates or glowing portals, just an opening, simple, quiet, waiting. Hades stops at the threshold, not out of fear, not out of doubt, just taking it in. And you stand beside him, feeling that same strange mix of anticipation and calm, as if you're both about to step into something entirely ordinary and entirely new at the same time. Section 5. You step through the opening with him, and the first thing you notice isn't what you see, it's what you feel. Warmth, not overwhelming, not the kind that makes you squint or sweat immediately. Just a gentle, steady warmth that settles on your skin like something familiar you forgot you missed. The air moves differently here. It isn't still and heavy. It shifts, carries scent, brushes past you like it has somewhere to be. Hades pauses just beyond the threshold. For a moment, he doesn't move at all, and then slowly he lifts his head. Above you stretches the surface world, wide open and possibly alive. The sky isn't just a color, it's layered, shifting, almost too large to take in all at once. Pale blue fades into something brighter, streaked with thin clouds that drift like they're thinking about going somewhere but haven't committed yet. You glance at him. There's no dramatic reaction, no gasp, no visible shock, but something in his expression, subtle, almost hidden, softens. This is not new to him, but it is distant. In Greek mythology, Hades is rarely depicted as visiting the surface. Unlike his brothers, he doesn't wander among mortals or interfere with their lives on a whim. His connection to the upper world comes mostly through Persephone, his queen, who divides her time between the underworld and the earth, creating the cycle of seasons, which means this place, this sunlight, is not unfamiliar, just long neglected. You take a step forward. The ground feels different beneath your feet. Firm, yes, but alive in a way the underworld never was. There's texture, variation, the subtle give of soil and grass. You hadn't realized how uniform everything below felt until now. A breeze passes. It carries a scent, faint, green, almost sweet. You don't have a name for it immediately, but your body does. Life. Hades notices it too. You see it in the way his fingers shift slightly, as if resisting the urge to reach out and confirm that this is real, that this isn't just a memory or a fragment of something he once knew. He takes another step, and then very quietly, something almost comical happens. He squints, not dramatically, just enough that you can tell the sunlight, soft as it is still too much at first. It's the expression of someone who just walked out of a dark movie theater at noon and forgot the world was this bright. If gods had to adjust brightness settings, this would definitely be the moment he's sliding it down from blinding to manageable. You almost smile. Almost. Because there's something unexpectedly human about it. Around you, the world continues without noticing. Birds move through the sky, their wings cutting soft arcs through the air. Somewhere nearby, you hear the faint rustle of leaves, trees shifting gently in the wind. It's not loud. Nothing here is trying to overwhelm you. It's just constant, subtle motion. The opposite of the underworld's stillness. Here's a detail that often gets overlooked. In ancient Greek thought, the world of the living wasn't necessarily more important than the world of the dead. It was just different. Both were essential. Both had their own order. But standing here, you can feel why mortals clung so tightly to this side. There's variation, change, the promise that something might be different tomorrow. Hades walks forward, slow and deliberate, as if each step requires a small recalibration. Not because he's unfamiliar with walking, but because the ground here doesn't behave like the ground below. It's uneven, imperfect, alive. You follow, noticing the small things, the way light filters through leaves, or creating patterns that shift every few seconds. The faint sound of insects, steady, almost rhythmic. The distant hint of water, maybe a stream or river you can't yet see. It's a lot. Not overwhelming, but layered. You glance at Hades again. He's looking outward, taking it in with a focus that feels almost careful, as if he doesn't want to miss anything. For someone who has spent eternity in a place where almost nothing changes, this must feel like stepping into a world that refuses to sit still. Historians are still debating whether the Greeks imagined their gods as fully emotional beings or more symbolic representations of forces. But right now, you'd say he looks curious, not bored, not detached, curious, and maybe a little unsure what to do with that. You walk a bit farther and the path opens into a small clearing. Grass stretches out in soft, uneven patches, dotted with tiny plants you don't recognize. Nothing grand, nothing mythically dramatic, just a quiet piece of land. Hades stops again. He looks down, and then, very slowly, he crouches. You weren't expecting that. Carefully, almost cautiously, he reaches out and touches the ground. His fingers press lightly into the soil, testing it, as if confirming that it will respond. It does. The earth gives slightly under his touch. He lifts his hand, examining the faint traces of dirt against his skin. It's such a small moment, but it feels important, because this is not the ruler of the underworld issuing commands or overseeing judgment. This is someone experiencing something. You think about how long it's been since he's done this, really done this, without purpose, without obligation. Just touch the ground. A breeze passes again, stronger this time, rustling the grass and carrying that same green scent. You notice his shoulders shift slightly, as if relaxing into it. And then, almost imperceptibly, he exhales. Longer this time. Deeper. If this were a modern setting, you'd say he just finally closed all his tabs and realized how quiet his brain could be. Behind you, far below, the underworld continues its slow adjustment. Souls still wander. Judges still decide, though not as smoothly. Cerberus still watches, though with a bit more guesswork. The system hasn't failed. It's just learning to run without constant oversight. Up here, none of that feels immediate. The world doesn't pause because a god took a break. It keeps moving. Wind shifts, light changes, time, real, measurable time passes. And Hades, for the first time in what might be ages beyond counting, is standing in it. Not above it, not beneath it. In it. You take a slow breath, matching the rhythm of the air around you, and for a moment you both just stand there. No urgency, no expectation, just the quiet, steady presence of a world that doesn't need to be managed every second. And a God who is beginning very slowly to realize that maybe, just maybe, he doesn't either. Section 6. You linger in that clearing a little longer than you expected to, though expected is a strange concept when time suddenly feels like it belongs to you again. Or at least, to him. The light shifts almost imperceptibly, soft shadows stretching and relaxing as clouds drift overhead with no concern for schedules, duties, or eternal responsibilities. Hades straightens slowly, brushing a faint trace of soil from his fingers. The gesture is small, almost absent-minded, but you notice how he pauses afterward, just a fraction of a second, as if considering whether he actually needed to brush it off at all. Down below, nothing ever sticks. Up here, things do. You walk a little farther together, stepping through grass that bends and springs back beneath your feet. It's uneven in a way that would probably annoy anyone used to perfectly carved stone paths. But here, that unevenness feels intentional, like the world is gently reminding you it wasn't designed for efficiency. A bird calls somewhere overhead, short, sharp, then gone. Hades glances up, not startled, just attentive. You get the sense he's cataloging the sound, placing it somewhere in a mental archive that hasn't been updated in a very long time. In ancient Greek thought, birds were often seen as messengers or omens, sometimes linked to the gods themselves. But this one? It doesn't seem to be delivering anything. It's just existing, making noise because that's what it does. There's something oddly refreshing about that. You walk past a cluster of low shrubs, their leaves catching the light in shifting patterns. A breeze moves through them, creating that soft, continuous rustle, like whispered conversations that never quite form words. Hades slows again, not because he has to, because he can. That difference is subtle, but you feel it. He steps closer to the shrubs, reaching out, not with hesitation this time, but with a quiet curiosity that feels more settled. His fingers brush against the leaves, and they respond instantly, trembling, adjusting, continuing to move even after his hand pulls away. Cause and effect. Immediate. Simple. Down in the underworld, change exists, but it's slow, almost abstract. Here, everything reacts. You wonder if that's what he's noticing too. And then, because the world apparently enjoys reminding him that it is, in fact, alive, something small and unexpected happens. A tiny insect lands on his hand. You almost laugh, not out loud, but internally, in that quiet way that feels safe for a nighttime story. Because here is the ruler of the underworld, a god who oversees the fate of every soul that has ever lived, and he is now being gently inspected by something the size of a grain of rice. He doesn't react immediately. He simply looks at it, tilts his hand slightly, watches. The insect moves, pauses, moves again, completely unaware of the significance of its chosen landing spot. To it, this is just another surface. Historians are still debating whether the Greeks imagined their gods as vulnerable to the small, ordinary aspects of nature, or if these moments were symbolic of balance between realms. But right now, it just feels quietly amusing. Eventually, the insect lifts off and disappears into the air, leaving behind nothing but the memory of a moment that would never be recorded in any epic poem. Hades lowers his hand. There's a faint shift in his expression again. Not quite a smile, but something close, something softer. You continue walking. The clearing gradually gives way to a narrow path lined with taller grasses and scattered stones. In the distance, you can hear water more clearly now, a gentle, continuous flow that seems to draw you forward. And here's a well-known contrast. In the underworld, rivers like the Styx and Acheron are boundaries, barriers, symbols of transition and separation. But up here, rivers are just rivers. They don't divide the living from the dead. They nourish, they move, they reflect the sky. It's a different kind of meaning entirely. You follow the sound until the path opens onto a small stream. It's not wide. You could probably step across it if you tried. The water is clear, moving over smooth stones in a way that creates that soft, repetitive sound, almost like nature's version of white noise. Honestly, if someone bottled this sound and sold it as a sleep app, it would probably do very well. Hades stops at the edge. He looks down at the water, watching the way it flows, never still, never exactly the same from one moment to the next. He crouches again, this time with more ease, and slowly, deliberately, he reaches out and lets his fingers dip into the stream. The reaction is immediate. The water shifts around his hand, rippling outward, catching the light in tiny flashes that disappear as quickly as they appear. He holds it there for a moment, then moves his fingers slightly, creating small currents, watching how the water responds. It's simple, almost childlike, but there's something deeply grounding about it. In Greek myth, water often carries symbolic weight, rivers of memory, rivers of forgetfulness, rivers that separate worlds. But this water, it doesn't seem to carry anything but itself. No souls, no judgment, just movement. He lifts his hand, watching the droplets fall back into the stream, each one catching the light for a brief second before disappearing. You notice the way his shoulders settle again, just a little more. If relaxation were a scale, he's maybe moved from eternally burdened to mildly less burdened, which for a god is probably significant progress. Behind you, far beneath layers of earth and stone, the underworld continues its quiet, slightly off-balance rhythm. Cerberus is still guarding, more or less. The judges are still judging, slightly slower than usual. Souls are still wandering, though with a touch more hesitation. It hasn't fallen apart, but it's not quite as seamless. Up here, none of that tension exists. The stream flows, the wind moves, time passes. And Hades, still crouched at the edge of the water, seems to be discovering something that doesn't require control, management, or oversight. Just presence. You sit down nearby, letting the sound of the stream settle into the background of your thoughts. It's steady, predictable in its unpredictability, always changing, yet always the same. And for a while, neither of you speaks. Not because there's nothing to say, but because, for the first time in a very long time, nothing needs to be said at all. Section 7. You stay by the stream a while longer, long enough that the sound of the water stops feeling like something you're listening to and becomes something you're inside of. It blends with the wind, with the faint rustle of grass, with the distant, almost forgettable hum of life moving somewhere beyond your view. Hades eventually rises. Not abruptly. Nothing he does right now is abrupt, but with that same quiet deliberation that now feels less like responsibility and more like choice. He looks along the stream, following its path as it curves gently through the landscape, disappearing behind a cluster of trees. You follow his gaze, and without saying anything, because neither of you really needs to, he begins to walk in that direction. The ground shifts slightly under your feet as you move away from the smooth stones of the stream and onto softer earth. It's uneven again, but not in a way that slows you down. More like it encourages you to pay attention. A breeze moves through the trees ahead, and for the first time, you hear something new. Voices. Faint. Not clear enough to understand, but unmistakably human. You glance at Hades. He's already noticed. Of course he has. In myth, he is deeply connected to humanity, not through interaction, but through inevitability. Every life eventually leads to him, which means he has seen humanity at its end more times than anyone else. But this is different. This is humanity in motion, alive. You move closer. The trees thin just enough to reveal a small clearing beyond, where a handful of people are gathered. Nothing grand, no temple, no ritual, no offering piles or dramatic ceremonies, just people. A couple of figures sit on the ground, leaning against rocks or each other. One stands, gesturing as they speak, their movements animated in that familiar way people get when they're telling a story they've told before, but still enjoy telling. You can't hear the words yet, but you can feel the rhythm of it. Conversation. It's oddly comforting. Hades stops at the edge of the trees, remaining partially hidden in the shade. You do the same, instinctively. Not out of fear, more out of respect, as if stepping too openly into this moment might disturb it. He watches, carefully. You notice something subtle. His expression is harder to read now, not because it's closed off, but because it's layered. There's curiosity, yes, but also something else, something quieter. Recognition, maybe. In ancient Greek myth, gods often observed mortals, sometimes interfering, sometimes remaining distant. But Hades, unlike many others, wasn't known for casual visits. He didn't wander among humans just to see what they were up to. So this quiet observation feels rare, a privilege almost. The voices become clearer. And then he just dropped it, one of them says, laughter following the words. Another responds, no, you're making that part up. More laughter. It's simple. The kind of conversation that doesn't carry the weight of eternity, just the passing moment. And here's something interesting. In many myths, mortals were fully aware of the god's existence, but their daily lives weren't always dominated by it. They still told stories, joked, argued, lived. The divine was present, but not always overwhelming. Historians are still debating whether this reflects actual belief or later interpretation, but moments like this suggest a world where life continued in its own rhythm, regardless of what the gods were doing. Hades tilts his head slightly, listening. Not for meaning, exactly, more for tone, for the shape of living voices. One of the people shifts, standing up and stretching. Another tosses a small object, maybe a piece of fruit, maybe something else, and it lands softly in the grass. The smallest things, movements without consequence, choices without eternal impact. You glance at Hades again. He hasn't moved. But there's a stillness to him that feels different from the stillness of the underworld. This isn't the stillness of control. It's the stillness of observation, of someone who doesn't need to act. And then, because the world has a sense of timing, you notice something quietly amusing. A child. Off to the side, slightly apart from the others, a small figure crouches near the ground, completely absorbed in something you can't quite see. They're not paying attention to the conversation, not engaging with the group. Just focused. Hades notices too. The child reaches down, picks something up, a stone, maybe, and examines it with intense concentration, turning it over as if it holds some great secret. You almost expect thunder or a sudden moment of divine significance. But no, it's just a kid looking at a rock, and somehow that feels more important. Hades takes a small step forward. You tense slightly, wondering if he's about to reveal himself, to step fully into the scene. He doesn't. He stops again, just at the edge of shadow and light, close enough to see clearly, far enough to remain unseen. The child drops the stone, then immediately picks up another, repeating the process with the same level of interest. It's repetitive, pointless, completely unproductive, and yet absorbing. If this were a modern scenario, you'd say the child has just discovered the original version of scrolling endlessly through random content. And honestly, it's working. Hades watches, and for a moment, just a moment, you see something shift again. Not curiosity this time, something softer, something that almost looks like understanding. Because here is a being who oversees the end of every life, watching a moment at the very beginning of one. A moment that has no consequence, no lasting impact, no place in history, and yet it exists fully, without needing to matter. The wind moves again, carrying voices, laughter, the faint sound of movement. Life continues, unaware, unbothered, and beside you, the god of the dead stands quietly in the shade, observing a world that doesn't pause for him, and realizing perhaps that it never needed to. You shift your weight slightly, careful not to disturb the moment, and for a while longer, you both just watch. No intervention, no judgment, just the quiet, steady presence of something that doesn't belong to him, but somehow still feels connected, like a memory he didn't know he missed. Section 8. You stay there at the edge of the trees, just long enough for the moment to settle into something almost dreamlike. The voices drift, rise, fall, laughter fades into softer conversation. The child eventually stands, wanders back toward the others, completely unaware of the quiet observer standing just beyond the light. And then, without warning, though perhaps you should have expected it, something shifts. Not in the clearing, in the air. A faint ripple, like heat rising from stone, but cooler somehow. Subtle but unmistakable. If the underworld had a "You've Got Mail" notification, this would be it, except no one turned off the sound. You glance at Hades. He's already aware. Of course he is. His posture changes, not tense, not alarmed, but attentive in a different way. The kind of attention that comes from being called, even if no one spoke his name out loud. Far below, something has reached a threshold. Not chaos, not collapse. Just enough imbalance that it begins to echo upward. You don't see it, but you feel it, like a faint tug at the edge of your awareness. The underworld, still running, still functioning, but now clearly missing its anchor. Back there, Cerberus has stood up again. All three heads alert, because now something has happened that wasn't supposed to. A soul, one of the countless drifting figures, has wandered closer to the boundary again. But this time, they don't stop. Not immediately. Cerberus reacts, faster now, instinct kicking in. But there's that fraction of hesitation again, that tiny delay between should and do. And in that fraction, the soul steps just a little too far, not fully out, not escaping, but crossing enough of the threshold that the boundary itself seems to ripple. It corrects almost instantly. Cerberus blocks, redirects, restores the order as best as instinct allows. But the moment has already happened, and moments like that matter. Historians are still debating whether the Greeks imagined the boundaries of the underworld as fixed barriers or more fluid thresholds maintained by divine presence. But right now, you'd say it's very clear. The system works best when someone is watching. Back near the judges, the delay has grown slightly longer again. A soul waits. Minos hesitates. Rhadamanthus glances upward, just briefly. Acus shifts, as if trying to remember something that isn't quite there. Nothing breaks, but everything takes effort. And effort, in a place designed for inevitability, feels unusual. Up here, the ripple reaches Hades like a distant echo. He doesn't react dramatically. No sudden turn, no immediate return. But you see it, the smallest shift in his expression. Awareness, responsibility, gently tapping him on the shoulder like, "Hey, just so you know." You almost expect him to sigh. He doesn't. But there's a pause now, a longer one than before. The clearing behind you continues as if nothing has changed. The people talk, move, laugh. The child has found something else to examine. Maybe a stick this time, which is honestly a strong upgrade from the rock. Life remains blissfully unaware of administrative issues in the afterlife. If only everything worked like that. Hades takes a step back, not toward the underworld, just back, creating a little more distance between himself and the scene in front of him. You follow, instinctively. The air shifts again, carrying that faint, almost invisible tension from below. It's not urgent, but it's there. Like a message marked not important, but you know it probably is. In Greek myth, the gods are often portrayed as balancing multiple responsibilities, though not always gracefully. Zeus, for example, tends to handle things with a mix of authority and questionable decision-making. Hades, on the other hand, is known for consistency, reliability. He doesn't leave things unfinished, which makes this moment interesting, because he has, temporarily. You watch him as he turns slightly, looking not directly back toward the underworld, but in that direction, as if considering it without fully committing to the thought. The breeze moves again, softer now, carrying less sound from the clearing, more quiet. He takes a breath, slow, measured, and then, unexpectedly, he doesn't go back. Not yet. Instead, he begins to walk again, away from the clearing, following the curve of the land toward a slightly higher rise where the light feels a little broader, the sky a little more open. You blink. That wasn't what you expected. But then again, maybe that's the point. Because whatever is happening below, it's not falling apart. It's adjusting. Straining slightly, yes, but holding. And here, for the first time in what might be an eternity, Hades is allowing that. Allowing something to continue without him. It's a small act, but it feels significant. You walk beside him, the ground sloping gently upward now. The grass thins, giving way to patches of exposed earth and scattered stones that catch the sunlight in dull, warm tones. The sky opens wider above you. Endless, uncontained. You didn't realize how enclosed the underworld felt until now. Hades slows as you reach the top of the rise. From here you can see farther. Rolling land stretching out in soft layers, fading into the distance where light and air blend into something almost indistinct. No walls, no ceilings, just space. He stands there, looking out, and for a moment, the faint pull from below seems to fade, not gone, but quieter, like a notification you've decided not to check just yet. You can almost hear the underworld continuing, adjusting, recalibrating in his absence. Cerberus guarding, with effort. Judges deciding, with pauses. Souls wandering, with slight uncertainty. Not perfect, but functioning. And up here the world keeps moving. Wind across open land, light shifting with the slow drift of clouds. Time passing in a way that feels gentle. Hades exhales again, longer, deeper. And this time there's no hesitation in it. Because for now, just for now, he's choosing to stay. To experience this. To let the underworld run without him, even if it's not quite as smooth. And you stand beside him, looking out at a world that doesn't need permission to continue. Realizing that sometimes even the most constant forces can step away and trust that things won't immediately fall apart, even if they wobble a little, which honestly feels like a very relatable system. Section 9. You stand there on the rise with him long enough that the light begins to feel less like something you're noticing and more like something you're inside of. The sky stretches endlessly and the land rolls out in soft layers, each one fading gently into the next. Nothing rushes, nothing demands. And then, because of course it does, something moves. Not in front of you, behind. A flicker of motion, quick and deliberate, like someone who never walks when they can run. You don't hear footsteps so much as you sense them, light, fast, almost rhythmic. Hades doesn't turn immediately. He doesn't need to. You do. And there, just at the edge of the rise, someone appears as if they've always been mid-stride. Hermie, if speed had a personality, it would probably look like this, lean, alert, and already slightly impatient before the conversation even begins. He slows just enough to stop, though. Stop, for him feels more like pause with intent. He looks at Hades, then at you, then back at Hades. Well, his expression practically says, even before any words arrive, this is new. In Greek mythology, Hermes is the messenger of the gods, the guide of souls, the one who moves between worlds with ease. If anyone was going to notice that something was off, it was always going to be him. He's basically the original delivery system, and right now, the package has gone missing. There's a brief silence, not awkward, just loaded. You almost expect Hermes to pull out a scroll, check a list, maybe say something like, according to my schedule, you are very much not where you're supposed to be. Instead, he tilts his head slightly. You left. The meaning comes through clearly, even if the words themselves feel soft, almost casual. Hades doesn't respond right away. Of course he doesn't. He looks out over the landscape again, as if finishing a thought before acknowledging the interruption. Then, slowly, he turns, and for the first time since you've been up here, you see him face another god. It's subtle, but the atmosphere shifts. Not tense, just aware. Hermes steps closer, his movements quick but controlled, like he's constantly resisting the urge to move faster than everyone else around him. You know things are slightly less organized down there, he continues, tone light but carrying that unmistakable edge of responsibility. Slightly. That's generous. You imagine Cerberus trying to interpret policy on the fly and almost feel the need to send him a supportive message. Hang in there, buddy. Hades says nothing, but there's no denial in his silence. Hermes exhales, glancing briefly past him, taking in the view, the open sky, the rolling land, the quiet movement of the world. He pauses, and for a moment, even he seems to slow down. That's nice, his expression admits, almost reluctantly, which is saying something, because Hermes is not known for stopping to admire scenery. He's more of a pass-through quickly, maybe wave kind of presence. Historians are still debating whether Hermes' role as a psychopomp, guide of souls, made him more connected to both life and death than other gods, or simply more accustomed to constant motion. But right now, he looks like someone caught between two speeds. The urgency of duty and the unexpected calm of the moment. He looks back at Hades. They're managing, he adds after a beat, a pause, mostly. That last word lands with just enough weight, to be honest. You picture it again. Judges hesitating, souls drifting without clear direction. Cerberus doing his absolute best with three slightly different opinions, functional, but not smooth. Hermes shifts his weight, glancing briefly at you again, not surprised, just acknowledging your presence like you've always been part of this strange little scene. Then he looks back at Hades. You planning to stay up here long? The question hangs, light in tone but anchored in something more serious. Because this isn't just about a walk, it's about balance. In Greek myth, each god's role isn't just a job, it's a fundamental part of how the world functions. Zeus doesn't just rule the sky, he is the sky's authority. Poseidon doesn't just oversee the sea, he is its force. And Hades is the underworld, so when he steps away even slightly it matters. Hades looks at Hermes, then briefly at you, and then back out at the horizon. It's not defiance, not avoidance, just consideration. He takes a slow breath, the kind that fills your chest and settles somewhere deeper. Hermes watches him, waiting, not impatiently, just ready. And then finally Hades responds, not with words you can clearly hear, but with something you understand anyway. Not yet. Hermes blinks, once, twice. You can almost see the calculation happening behind his eyes, timelines, responsibilities, the current state of things below, the potential for escalation if this continues too long. And then, unexpectedly, he smiles. Not wide, not dramatic, just a small, knowing curve. All right, he seems to say. Because if there's one thing Hermes understands, it's movement. And sometimes, movement includes stopping. He steps back slightly, giving space. Not just physically, but in that unspoken way that says, I'll handle things, for now. Which is both reassuring and mildly concerning, depending on how much you trust the fastest god in existence to multitask. He glances once more at the horizon, then back at Hades. Don't take too long, he adds, tone light again, but with just enough emphasis to remind you that too long is a very flexible concept when you're dealing with eternity. And then just like that, he's gone. Not dramatically. No flash of light, no thunder. Just movement. One step and then he's no longer where he was. If teleportation had a casual setting, that would be it. You blink, he's gone. The air settles again, the faint ripple of his presence fading into the background, and you're back where you started, standing on the rise beside a god who has temporarily stepped away from being exactly what he's always been. But now there's a new layer to it. Awareness, acknowledgement, a reminder that below things are still turning, just not quite as smoothly. Hades looks out over the land again, then very slightly upward, as if measuring something only he can see, and for a moment you wonder what he's thinking. About the underworld, about this place, about the balance between them. But he doesn't explain. He doesn't need to, because sometimes understanding isn't about answers. It's about standing in the space between two worlds, knowing both are still there, and deciding, just for a little while longer, which one you want to be in. Section 10. You remain on the rise for a while after Hermes disappears, the air settling back into that slow, unhurried rhythm. It's almost as if nothing happened. No messenger, no quiet warning, no reminder that an entire realm is currently running on what you might generously call low supervision mode. But of course, something did happen. Because now, you know. And more importantly, Hades knows you know. He doesn't say anything about Hermes, doesn't acknowledge the visit directly. Instead, he begins to walk again, this time down the far side of the rise, where the land slopes gently toward a wider stretch of open ground. You follow. The grass here is shorter, broken by patches of dry earth and scattered stones that have clearly been sitting in the sun for a very long time. They radiate a faint warmth, like they've been quietly collecting light all day and aren't in any hurry to give it back. There's a stillness here, not the heavy stillness of the underworld, but a calm pause, like the world is taking a breath between moments. You notice the sky again. It's shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough that the light feels softer now, more golden than bright. Time is moving, gently, steadily, without asking anyone's permission. That's something the underworld doesn't really have. Time down there is abstract, eternal, the same and not the same all at once. But here, you can feel it passing, like water through your fingers. Hades slows, then stops. Ahead, there's a structure, simple, small, a hut maybe, built from wood and stone, its edges softened by age and weather. Smoke rises faintly from somewhere behind it, thin and steady. You didn't notice it at first. It doesn't demand attention. It just exists. And for some reason, that feels important. Hades looks at it, not with curiosity this time, something quieter, more reflective. You approach slowly, the ground crunching softly under your steps. As you get closer, you notice the details, the uneven placement of stones, the slight tilt of the roof, the way the door hangs just a little off center. It's imperfect, completely. And yet, functional. Inside, you hear movement, light, unhurried, a person, just one from the sound of it. You glance at Hades, wondering if he'll step forward, reveal himself, interact. He doesn't. Instead, he stops just outside the boundary where the worn path meets the open ground, as if there's an invisible line he's choosing not to cross. And you realize something. This isn't about observing anymore. This is about remembering. In Greek mythology, mortals built their lives in small, practical ways: homes, tools, routines. Their world wasn't defined by grand myths every moment. Most of it was quiet, repetitive, ordinary, and yet those small things made up everything. Historians are still debating whether ancient Greek texts intentionally emphasized these humble aspects of life or if they simply survived alongside the more dramatic stories. But standing here, it feels like those quiet details matter just as much. A figure steps out of the hut, older, not ancient, but worn in that natural way that comes from years of living rather than centuries of existing. They carry something, a bundle of sticks maybe, or tools. It's hard to tell at this distance. They move slowly, but not weakly, deliberate, comfortable. This is someone who knows their space, who doesn't rush because there's no reason to. They set the bundle down, stretch slightly, then glance up at the sky, squinting just a little at the light. You almost laugh, because even here, in a quiet, ordinary moment, the sunlight still wins. The person walks a few steps, adjusting something near the side of the hut, checking, fixing, continuing. Small tasks, necessary tasks, the kind that don't get written into legends. Hades watches, still, silent. You wonder what he sees, not just the person, but the pattern, the repetition, the cycle. Work, rest, adjust, continue. It's not so different from the underworld in a way. Souls arrive, they are judged, they settle, the system continues. But here there's variation, choice, change. The person pauses, wiping their hands against their clothing, then picks up a small container and walks a short distance away, toward what looks like a patch of cultivated ground. A garden, simple rows, nothing elaborate, but alive. They kneel, tending to it with the same quiet focus as the child with the rock earlier. Different stage of life, same kind of attention. You glance at Hades again, and there it is, that shift. Not curiosity, not even just observation, recognition. Because this quiet, repetitive, imperfect life is what eventually leads every soul to him. This is the beginning of every ending he has ever seen. And yet watching it here, it doesn't feel like an ending at all. It just feels ongoing. The person stands again, stretching their back, then looks around briefly, eyes passing over the land, the sky, and for just a second, almost in your direction. You hold still, instinctively. Hades doesn't move. The person pauses, then shakes their head slightly, as if dismissing a thought, and returns to their task. Unaware, unbothered. Life continues. If this were a modern moment, you'd say they just had that feeling of, did I leave something on? And then immediately decided it wasn't worth checking. Relatable. Hades exhales again, soft, measured. But this time, there's something else in it, not just relaxation, understanding. Because here in this small, quiet place, you can see the full arc of existence, not as a dramatic story, but as a series of simple, repeated actions that over time become a life, and eventually, an arrival. Below, the underworld continues its slightly uneven rhythm. Cerberus holds the line, with effort. The judges decide with pauses. Souls wander with uncertainty, but they still arrive. They always will. And here, standing just outside the edge of a life still being lived, Hades seems to understand something that doesn't require words, that his role isn't separate from this. It's connected, directly, inevitably. You shift your weight slightly, the ground warm beneath your feet, the light softer now, the air calmer. And beside you, the god of the dead watches a simple, ordinary life unfold, realizing perhaps that even the smallest moments above are part of the vast, quiet system he oversees below. Not interruptions, not distractions, but beginnings, the kind that make everything else make sense. Section 11. You remain there, just outside the small orbit of that quiet life, long enough for the rhythm to become almost hypnotic. The person moves between tasks, checking the garden, adjusting something by the hut, pausing occasionally to look at the sky as if measuring time not by clocks, but by light. It's steady, predictable, and yet never exactly the same. Hades doesn't move, but something about him has shifted again. Not in posture, not in expression, exactly, but in presence. Before, he was observing like someone visiting a place. Now he feels connected to it. You notice it in the way his gaze follows the smallest details, the turn of a hand, the placement of a tool, the momentary pause before starting something new. These are not grand actions. They don't echo through history, but they matter because they accumulate. In Greek thought, life wasn't always defined by singular heroic moments. Most people lived quietly, their stories never becoming myth. And yet those lives still ended in the same place, guided eventually by Hermes judged, and then settled into the afterlife. That's the part that's often overlooked. The scale, not just heroes, everyone. Historians are still debating whether the Greeks fully grasped the philosophical weight of that idea, or if it simply existed alongside their stories without being explicitly analyzed. But standing here, you can feel it. Every small action, every quiet moment, it all leads somewhere. The person by the hut kneels again, pressing their hands into the soil, adjusting something in the garden. You watch the way they work, careful, patient, not rushing. There's no urgency, no sense that this moment needs to be anything more than what it is. And that's when it happens. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just a pause. The person stops, their hands still in the soil. They sit back slightly, as if catching their breath, or maybe just thinking. It's subtle, but something about it feels different. You glance at Hades. He's noticed. Of course he has. His focus sharpens, not tense, not alarmed, just attentive in a deeper way. Because this is a moment he understands better than anyone. The space between action and stillness, between movement and stopping. The person exhales, sludgered, measured, then shifts, sitting back fully, looking out over the small patch of land they've been tending. The light has changed again, softer now, leaning toward that golden hue that comes before the day begins to fade. Time moving forward, always. There's a well-known truth in Greek myth. Death is inevitable, but not always immediate or dramatic. Sometimes it comes quietly, without warning, without spectacle. And here in this simple, ordinary setting, you can feel the possibility of that truth, not as something frightening, just present. The person lifts a hand, wiping their brow, then lets it rest loosely on their knee. They look at the sky again, longer this time, as if trying to remember something, or maybe just appreciating the light. You realize how many moments like this must exist, unrecorded, unnoticed, but deeply real. Hades takes a step forward, just one. Still not crossing fully into the space, but closer now, closer than before. You feel the air shift slightly, not colder, not darker, just heavier with meaning. Because this is no longer just observation. This is proximity, connection. The person's gaze drifts again, slower now, their movements less frequent. Not struggling, not afraid, just easing. Historians are still debating whether ancient Greeks imagined death as a sudden event or a gradual transition, but many myths suggest it could be either. And here, it feels like something in between, a soft fading, a quiet threshold. The person leans back slightly, supporting themselves with one hand, then lowers themselves more fully to the ground, resting. The garden remains, the hut stands, the sky continues to shift, nothing stops, nothing reacts. Life doesn't pause for this moment. And that's what makes it feel so real. You glance at Hades again. There's no uncertainty in him now, no hesitation, just a calm, steady awareness, because this is his domain too. Not the life itself, but what comes after. And he understands this moment in a way no one else can. Not as an interruption, not as an ending, but as a continuation. The person's breathing slows, their gaze softens, then stills, and just like that, it happens. No sound, no dramatic shift. Just a quiet, almost imperceptible transition from movement to stillness. You don't see anything leave. Not visibly, but you feel it. A subtle release, like a breath finally exhaled after being held too long. And in that space, something new appears. Not fully formed, not solid, but present. A faint outline. A presence that wasn't there before. The soul. It stands, if standing is the right word, near where the body rests, looking around with that same soft confusion you've seen before. Awake, but not fully understanding. You remember what happens next, the journey, the crossing, the judgment, all the steps that lead back down to the place you came from. And now you're watching the beginning of that process. From the other side, Hades steps forward again, this time crossing the invisible boundary. Not dramatically, not with authority, just entering. The soul turns slightly, as if sensing something. Not fear, not recognition, just awareness. Hades doesn't speak, doesn't reach out. He simply stands there present, and somehow that's enough. Because this moment doesn't need instructions, it doesn't need explanation, it just needs witnessing. Behind you, far below, the underworld continues its quiet, imperfect rhythm. Cerberus guards, the judges wait, the system holds. And here, at the edge of a life just completed, you stand beside the one who receives them all, watching the exact point where one world gently gives way to another. No rush, no force, just transition, the kind that happens every day, the kind that connects everything. And for the first time, you see it not as something distant or abstract, but as something quiet, natural, and strangely peaceful. Section 12. You stand there in that soft, golden light, watching the moment stretch, not outward, not dramatically, but inward. The kind of moment that doesn't announce itself, doesn't need to. It simply settles into place, like a breath that finally decides to rest. The body remains where it is, still and quiet, part of the earth again in a way that feels almost seamless. But the soul, that faint, newly aware presence, stands just a little apart, looking around with that familiar uncertainty. You've seen it before, not here, but below. That first moment of, what now? Hades doesn't move immediately. He gives it time, which is interesting, because time here feels very different from time down in the underworld. There, everything stretches into something endless. Here, each second feels distinct, like a bead sliding along a thread. The soul turns slightly, as if noticing the shift in the air where Hades stands, not recognizing him, but sensing something. In Greek myth, souls don't always understand what's happening right away. Some sources suggest they are guided, others that they simply follow instinct or are drawn along certain paths. Historians are still debating whether this reflects a belief in structured afterlife journeys or a more symbolic idea of transition. But here, it feels simple. The soul takes a step, not toward the hut, not toward the body, toward him. Hades inclines his head, just slightly, not a command, not even an invitation, more like acknowledgement. And that's enough. The soul moves closer, slow and uncertain, like someone waking from a dream and trying to decide what's real. You stay where you are, watching, aware that this moment doesn't belong to you in the same way. This is between them. The beginning of a journey you've already walked in reverse. There's no dramatic exchange, no words, just presence. And then quietly, almost imperceptibly, the air shifts again. Not like before. This is lighter, faster, a flicker at the edge of movement. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared earlier, Hermes is there. Of course he is. If there's a soul beginning its journey, he's not far behind. He slows as he approaches, though slowing for him still feels quicker than most things. His gaze moves from Hades to the soul, then briefly to the still form on the ground. There's no surprise in him, just recognition of a familiar process. Well, his expression seems to say, there we go. He steps closer to the soul, his presence noticeably lighter than Hades, less weight, more motion. If Hades is stillness, Hermes is flow. The soul looks between them, not afraid, just unsure. Hermes offers something that feels like a gesture, not quite a hand, not quite a signal, but enough to guide. Come on, the meaning is clear, even if no words are spoken. This way. The soul hesitates for a moment, then follows. It's that simple. You watch as they begin to move, not back toward the hut, not deeper into the land, but along a path that seems to form as they walk. Subtle, barely visible, but there, a direction, a transition. Hades watches them go. He doesn't follow, not yet, because this part, the guiding, the moving between worlds, that belongs to Hermes, it always has. And here's something often overlooked. While Hades rules the underworld, he isn't usually the one who escorts souls there. That role belongs to Hermes, acting as a psychopomp, a guide between life and death. It's a division of responsibility, a system. Even now, even with everything slightly off balance below, that system is still working. Mostly. You glance at Hades. There's no tension in him, no urgency, just a quiet acceptance of the process unfolding exactly as it should. Hermes leads the soul a short distance, then pauses, glancing back. Not at you, at Hades. A look passes between them, brief, unspoken. A kind of check-in. Everything still okay? Hermes seems to ask without asking. Hades doesn't respond verbally, but something in his stillness answers. For now. Hermes nods slightly, then continues, guiding the soul further along that invisible path, their forms gradually becoming less distinct as distance, and something else grows between you. until eventually they're gone, not vanished, just beyond where you can see. The space they leave behind feels quiet again. Not empty, just settled. You look back at the hut, at the still body, at the garden. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has, because the life that filled this space has moved on, and the world continues. A breeze passes, softer now, carrying that same faint scent of earth and growth. You realize something. This happens all the time, everywhere, quietly, without ceremony, without announcement, and Hades sees it all, or at least receives what comes after. He turns slightly, looking back in the direction Hermes and the soul went. Then slowly he exhales, not tired, not burdened, just aware, more than before, because this wasn't just a moment of observation. It was a reminder of what connects the world above to the world below, not through force, not through control, but through something far more constant, inevitability. And yet here it doesn't feel heavy. It feels natural. You shift your stance slightly, the ground steady beneath you, the light softer now as the day leans gently toward its end. And beside you, the god of the underworld stands quietly, having just witnessed the exact moment his realm becomes relevant again, not as a distant abstraction, but as a direct continuation of a life that was just lived. No drama, no fear, just the next step. And for the first time, it feels less like something to avoid and more like something that simply belongs. Section 13. You remain there a little longer after Hermes and the soul disappear, the space settling back into something that feels almost untouched. The hut stands as it did. The garden waits. The body rests quietly, already beginning its return to the earth in a way that feels less like loss and more like completion. The light shifts again. Softer now, warmer. The kind of light that doesn't ask anything from you except to notice it. Hades turns slightly, his gaze lingering one last time on the place where the life unfolded. There's no lingering attachment in him, not in the human sense, but there is something like acknowledgement, a closed circle. You feel it too, that quiet sense of something finished without needing to be explained. And then, without ceremony, he steps back, away from the hut, away from the garden, not rushing, not retreating, just moving on, the way the world itself does. You follow. The ground feels familiar now, in a way it didn't before. The uneven texture, the soft give of soil, the shifting light, none of it feels strange anymore. It's just part of the experience. You walk in silence for a while, not the heavy silence of the underworld, but a lighter version, one filled with small sounds. Wind brushing past, leaves shifting, the distant echo of something alive moving somewhere beyond sight. It's comforting, in a quiet, almost unnoticeable way. Hades moves with that same steady pace, but there's a difference now. Not in speed, in weight. He feels lighter. Not because his responsibilities have disappeared, they haven't, but because he's seen them from the other side again, and that matters. In Greek myth, the balance between life and death isn't a battle, it's a cycle. One doesn't exist without the other. But it's easy, especially from below, to see only the ending. Here you've seen the beginning, and the middle, and the quiet transition between. Historians are still debating whether the Greeks viewed this cycle as comforting or inevitable in a more neutral sense. But walking here, it feels like something that simply is. Not good, not bad, just true. The land begins to change again as you move. The grass thins. The ground becomes more uneven, scattered with larger stones and patches of bare earth. The air shifts slightly cooler. Not abruptly, just enough that you notice the difference. You know this feeling, even if you can't see it yet. You're heading back, not because you've been told to, not because something has forced the decision, but because it's time. Hades slows as the land rises gently again, forming another natural ridge. From here, the sky still stretches wide, but there's a subtle narrowing ahead, an almost imperceptible closing of space. The path. You glance at him. He hasn't said anything. But there's no hesitation now, only clarity. He walks forward and you follow, the ground beneath your feet gradually shifting from soft earth back to something firmer, more familiar. The light behind you lingers, golden, calm. But ahead it begins to fade, not disappear, just soften into something less defined. The threshold is near. You feel it before you see it. That slight change in the air, that quiet pressure returning, not heavy, not oppressive, just present. Behind you, the world of the living continues. The hut remains. The garden grows. The cycle moves forward. And ahead, The underworld waits, not impatiently, not urgently, just as it always has. There's something almost comforting in that. Consistency. Even if it's a little less smooth than usual. You think of Cerberus, probably still doing its best, maybe slightly overthinking every decision now. You think of the judges, still working, though perhaps wishing for a clearer sense of certainty. You think of the souls, wandering, adjusting, waiting. It's all still there, still functioning, just aware of the absence. Hades reaches the edge of the path, the same opening you stepped through before. Simple, unmarked, waiting. He pauses, not for long, just enough to take in one last breath of the air above. You do the same. It feels different now, not new, not overwhelming, just understood. He steps forward and the world changes, not abruptly, gradually. The light dims, the air cools, the sounds soften into something more distant. You follow, the transition smoother this time, less like entering something unknown and more like returning to a place you now recognize. The path curves downward. The walls of earth and stone close in slightly, not trapping, just guiding. Behind you, the last traces of sunlight linger for a moment, then fade, and you're back. Not fully. Not yet, but close. Hades continues walking, steady as ever, but there's something different now. Not in him, but in how you see him. Before, he was the ruler of a distant, shadowed realm. Now, he's something else too. A witness. A participant in a cycle that connects everything you've just seen. He doesn't carry the underworld like a burden. He holds it like a continuation. And as you descend further, the familiar quiet begins to return, not empty, not heavy, just constant, waiting for him, for you, for everything that eventually finds its way there. And this time, it doesn't feel like a place apart from the world above. It feels like the next step in the same story, one that never really ends. It just continues. Pasture, section 14. You continue down the winding path, and the shift back into the underworld feels different this time. Not like entering something unfamiliar, but like returning to a place you now understand a little more. The air grows cooler, steady and unchanged, wrapping around you with that same quiet consistency you remember. The light fades into that soft, shadowed glow that doesn't come from any visible source, yet somehow fills the space evenly. Below, the underworld waits, not dramatically, just patiently. Hades walks ahead, his pace unchanged, but the space around him feels more settled now, as if something that had loosened has quietly found its place again. And as you descend, you begin to notice it, the difference, subtle, but unmistakable. The faint tension that lingered before, the slight delay in everything, has begun to smooth out, not instantly, but steadily, like a system reconnecting after a brief interruption. You pass the first familiar stretch of ground, where the walls widen slightly and the path levels out. The air here carries that soft echo again, the distant presence of countless souls, not loud, not overwhelming, just there. You didn't realize how much you recognized it until now. Ahead, the vast expanse of the underworld begins to open once more. The asphodel meadows stretch out, endless and muted, but something has shifted. Souls still wander, but with more direction, less hesitation. A figure pauses, then continues, not uncertainly, but with a faint sense of purpose, however quiet. It's not dramatic, just aligned again. Historians are still debating whether ancient Greeks imagined the underworld as a perfectly ordered system or something more fluid and adaptable. But standing here, it feels like a place that can adjust, but prefers balance. And balance has begun to return. You move further in. The air grows more familiar with each step. The silence, not empty but full in its own way, settles around you again. Ahead, the platform of the judges comes into view. Minos sits as before, Rhadamanthus beside him, Aeacus slightly apart. A soul stands before them. This time the pause is shorter, not absent, but quicker, more certain. Minos gestures. The soul moves, smooth, efficient, like a rhythm rediscovered. You almost imagine them collectively thinking, "Ah, yes, that's how this works." Nearby, the flow of souls continues, not rushed, not delayed, balanced. And just beyond, the dark surface of the river Styx moves as steadily as ever. Charon rows, without pause this time. No hesitation between crossings. No glances into the distance. Just the quiet, consistent motion of someone who knows exactly what to do. Which honestly must be a relief after a brief period of, we're figuring it out as we go. If there were performance reviews in the underworld, this would be the moment everyone collectively improves their score. You continue walking, and then You hear it, a low, familiar sound, not threatening, not aggressive, just present. Cerberus. You approach the gate once more, and there he is, all three heads alert, aligned, watching. This time there's no confusion, no hesitation, each movement precise, each gaze focused. One head glances at Hades, another scans the path, the third watches the boundary itself. Everything in sync again. If earlier felt like three different opinions trying to form a single decision, now it feels like one decision expressed 3 times. Efficient, confident. You almost want to give him a quiet nod of approval. Good job, you held it together. Cerberus doesn't react dramatically, but there's a subtle shift, a steadiness, that suggests the presence of Hades has restored something fundamental. Not control, alignment. Because here's the thing, Cerberus wasn't failing before. He was adapting, and now he doesn't have to. Hades steps forward, passing the gate without pause. Cerberus lowers his head slightly. Not submissive, not fearful, just acknowledging. You follow the space beyond opening into the deeper layers of the underworld. Everything feels right. Not perfect, not rigid, just balanced. And that balance isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply is. You walk beside Hades as he continues through his realm, the quiet authority of his presence settling back into place without effort. He doesn't issue commands, doesn't correct anything. He doesn't need to. Because the system now responds naturally. It always did. It just needed him to be part of it again. You think back to the surface, to the hardened, the small, ordinary life that quietly transitioned into this place. And you see it now, not as separate worlds, but as connected spaces in the same flow, above, below, beginning, continuation. Hades slows, just slightly. Not stopping, just acknowledging. This is where he belongs, not as a burden, not as a trap, but as a role that fits into the larger pattern you've just witnessed. Historians are still debating whether Hades was ever meant to represent something more than a distant ruler, whether his myths suggest detachment or quiet necessity. But walking here now, you'd say it's something else entirely. Presence. He is the part of the cycle that receives, that holds, that continues what has already begun. And now, having stepped away and returned, there's something different in that presence. Not stronger, not heavier, just clearer. You continue walking, the underworld stretching out around you, vast and steady. And for the first time, it doesn't feel like a place defined by endings. It feels like a place defined by continuation. Quiet, endless, and in its own way, peaceful. Section 15. You walk with him a little farther, deeper into the underworld, where everything feels settled again. Not rigid, not frozen, just quietly aligned, like a rhythm that has found its tempo after briefly losing the beat. Nothing announces his return. No horns, no divine broadcast, but everything responds. The way the air holds steady, the way the distant movement of souls feels less scattered, the way even the silence seems organized. Hades doesn't stop. He doesn't need to check anything, correct anything, or reassert control. His presence alone is enough, not because he demands it, but because the system recognizes him, like a key returning to a lock that was never fully closed. You follow, your steps quieter now, more in sync with the place itself. And the deeper you go, the more it all feels understandable. Not in a logical, explain it in a textbook way, but in that soft, intuitive sense of, this is how it's meant to be. You pass through familiar stretches, the fields where souls drift, the distant echoes of judgment, the quiet flow of the rivers, and nothing feels urgent. Nothing feels wrong. Just continuing. There's something calming about that, even here, especially here. Hades slows just slightly, near a place that feels central. Not a throne room exactly, not a grand hall, just a point where everything seems to connect. And for a moment he stands still. Not because he has to, because he chooses to. You stand beside him, and for the first time since the journey began, there's no movement pulling you forward, no sense of transition, just stillness, complete, balanced. You think back without effort, just gently, through everything you've seen, the quiet path upward, the first touch of sunlight, the breeze, the stream, the people, the child with the rock, the simple life by the hut, the moment of passing, the soul beginning its journey, and now, here, where that journey continues. It all connects, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, in a quiet, steady one, like a story that doesn't need a twist because it was never broken to begin with. Historians are still debating whether Greek myths were meant to comfort or simply to explain, but right now, it feels like both. a way of understanding something that doesn't need to be feared, just accepted. Hades exhales, slow, even, and there's no weight in it now. Not the kind you noticed before, just presence. You realize something. He didn't leave because he couldn't handle it. He left because even something constant can benefit from seeing itself from another angle, from remembering what it connects to. And now that he's returned, nothing is different. And yet, everything is. The underworld feels less like a place of endings, more like a place of holding, of receiving, of continuing what has already begun elsewhere. You shift your stance slightly, the ground steady beneath you, the air calm. There's no urgency here, no pressure, just space, the kind that lets thoughts slow down, let go, drift. And Hades standing beside you feels less like a distant figure now and more like part of that space itself, not separate from it, not above it, just within it. Time moves, or maybe it doesn't. It's hard to tell, but it doesn't matter because nothing here needs to hurry, nothing needs to change quickly. Everything simply continues. And slowly, gently, the edges of everything begin to soften. The shapes of the landscape blur slightly, not disappearing, just becoming less defined. The distant sounds fade into something more like a hum. The presence of everything around you becomes lighter, quieter. You take a slow breath, and then another. The air is cool, steady, familiar. Your thoughts begin to drift, like the souls you saw earlier, not lost, just unanchored in a peaceful way. There's nothing left to follow, no next step to take, just this quiet, endless continuation, and somewhere within it, a sense of calm that doesn't need to explain itself. Hades remains beside you, not speaking, not moving, just present. And that presence feels less like something to focus on and more like something you can rest within. The underworld stretches on, unchanging, endless, peaceful. And as your awareness softens further, the distinction between where you are and where you've been begins to fade. Above, below, beginning, continuation, all part of the same quiet flow. Your breathing slows, your thoughts grow softer, and the story, without ending, without stopping, simply eases, drifting, fading, like light dimming at the end of a long, calm day, until all that's left is stillness and rest. Open quote, open quote, open quote, end of script. Sweet dreams. Close quote, close quote, close quote.